to tell you about a morning I have never forgotten. I woke up, walked to the mirror, and didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. Not because I had changed, because I had been so thoroughly replaced by the version I had learned to perform. What looked back at me was a woman with dead eyes, no emotion, saying, "Another day, another night," almost robotic. I stood there trying to remember the last time I had actually laughed. Not the performed laugh, not the laugh you produce because the room expects it, the real one. I couldn't. I tried to remember the last time I had spoken up in a meeting and said exactly what I thought, without checking it first for temperature, without editing out the certainty, without deciding in advance how much conviction was too much conviction. Couldn't remember that either. The woman in the mirror felt a whole lot older than she actually was. And I stood there thinking, where did she go? The one with the spark, the one who was funny and sharp and didn't second guess every word before it left her mouth. I know some of you just felt something as you watched me say that. Not because my story is your story, but because there's something in it that is. Today, we're going to name what that something is. Welcome to Soul Fire Leadership, where we talk about what it actually feels like to lead at a senior level. The parts you're navigating alone because nobody in your environment is naming them. I'm Amanda L. Christian. I spent over 33 years leading inside finance and technology. I led global teams, built and moved data centers, co-wrote the disaster recovery plan for technology, and actually had to execute it twice. Once, September 11th, and during Hurricane Floyd. At one point, I had almost 100 direct reports. I'm the author of Soul Fire Leadership, the leadership model women were never taught. And I coach high-achieving senior leaders in finance and technology, for the most part. What happened to the woman in that mirror has a name. It's called the translation tax. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The translation tax is not about how you speak. It is about what you do to your actual thinking before it is allowed in the room. The split-second calculation before you open your mouth in a meeting. The decision about how much conviction is too much conviction. The edit you make to your own thinking before it reaches your mouth. Not because you're wrong, because you have learned with years of precision what this room will receive. That is code switching at work. And for senior leaders inside male-dominated industries, it is not occasional. It is the operating system. I was a chameleon. I could shape shift in a second. I leaned in hard. I spoke in the same tone and the same words the men did. I could be loud over the noise of the debate raging in the room. I walked like I belonged because I made myself belong on their terms. And then I got pulled aside after meetings and told I was being too aggressive. Stop being so loud and outspoken. Be more feminine. Oh, and by the way, could you take the meeting minutes at the next meeting? The message was clear. The rules were never actually about behavior. They were about who was allowed to behave that way. I had code switched so completely that I had adopted their patterns and I was still penalized for it. Most conversations about code switching frame it as a communication problem. Speak more assertively. Use fewer hedges. Take up more space. Those conversations locate the problem in you. They miss the point entirely. The tax is not a communication issue. It is a cognitive load. It runs underneath everything, and the longer you do it, the more invisible it becomes. And here's the part that will probably stop you cold. The leaders paying the highest translation tax are not the ones who look like they are struggling. They are the ones described as easy to work with, collaborative, diplomatic, pleasure in every room. That phrase, easy to work with, is often a receipt, not a compliment. It means the translation was so good, so automatic, so invisible that nobody saw her doing it, including her. What started as occasional code switching becomes a default operating mode over time. The original voice, the one that processes and decides to lead in a way that is actually hers, goes quiet. Not because she chose to silence it, because the translation became automatic. She stopped choosing it. She just does it now. And the leaders who are best at it, the ones who've been doing it for 20 or 30 years, are the least likely to catch themselves mid translation, which means the cost is invisible to everyone, including themselves. That was me in the mirror that morning. I had been paying the tax for so long that I had stopped noticing I was paying it. I thought the woman looking back at me with the dead eyes was just what senior leadership cost. That exhaustion, that flatness, that feeling of being a whole lot older than I actually am, it is not what leadership cost. It is what the tax cost. There's a difference. So where does it actually show up? The translation tax does not appear on your performance review. It does not get factored into your compensation, but it shows up, and I can tell you exactly where. Towards the end of my career, I was on a conference call with a manager who was relatively new to the organization. And he started belittling me, talking down to me in front of everyone else. Well, not in front of, but in front of everyone else on that call. I noticed something on that call. What I noticed was that no one spoke up. No one said a word in my defense. And I realized nobody was coming. If I was going to speak my truth, I was the only one who was going to do it. So I did. I went toe to toe with him. I stopped translating. I said exactly what I meant. And afterwards, I sat with how that felt. Strong, clear, like I was actually in the room instead of managing my presence in it. I thought for a moment and realized the woman in the mirror maybe wasn't finally gone. She was just waiting for a moment when the room forced her out. That is what the tax cost you. Not just energy, not just instinct. It cost you the moments where you could have spoken and didn't. And it cost you the ability to tell the difference between a deliberate choice and an automatic one. Which brings me to what I eventually learned. The goal is not to stop translating entirely. Subtranslation is a deliberate strategic choice. You know the room. You know what will move it. You make a conscious decision about how to frame what you know. That is not the tax. That is leadership. The tax is what happens when the translation is no longer a choice, when it runs on its own, underneath everything. Because somewhere along the way, it stopped being something you did and became something you are. There's a real difference between choosing how to land an idea and automatically suppressing your actual judgment because you learned years ago that a certain kind of certainty is not allowed from you. One is a skill, the other is the tax. What I learned the hard way and over years is that reclaiming your voice is not about stopping the translation. It's about learning to see when you're doing it, making it a conscious choice again, instead of an invisible reflex. Some people might call that politics. I call it getting your voice back. Because once you can see it, you can decide. And once you can decide, it is no longer the tax. It is a tool. That meeting where nobody came to my defense, that was the moment I stopped waiting for permission to use the tool. I just used it. The leaders I work with often do not realize what they have been paying until they are in a position where they're no longer required to pay it. Something shifts, not because they became someone new, because they recognized someone they had stopped listening to. I eventually figured out what I was looking at in the mirror. Not a woman who had lost herself, a woman who had gotten so good at the performance that she had started to believe it was her. She wasn't gone. She was just underneath everything I had learned to put on top. That woman is still there, but you have to stop mistaking the translation for her. Here's something small for you to try this week. Find one low stake moment, a one-on-one with someone you trust, an email you would normally soften before sending, a smaller room where the stakes are lower, and say the first version of what you actually think, not the edited one, not the one that you've already checked the temperature and adjusted for the room, the first one. And you are not looking for a confrontation. You are not trying to prove anything. You are just giving the unedited version one chance to exist outside your head, in a space where the translation has less grip. Notice what happens, not just in the room, but in you. That is where you start finding her again. Before you go, I want to ask you something, and I mean this as a real question. What is the last thing you edited out before you said it? Doesn't have to be a big thing. It could be one sentence in a meeting, one email you rewrote 3, 4, 5, maybe more times. One moment where you knew something and decided the room wasn't ready. Drop it in the comments, even one word. Because part of what makes the tax so expensive is that everyone is paying it alone. Nobody names it. Nobody compares notes. You just did. If this names something you've been carrying, please subscribe. And if you know of another leader who could use this, please forward this to them. I put out a new video every week, and this is what we do here. We name the things senior leaders are navigating that probably nobody in their environment is saying out loud. And if you want to look at specifically where the translation tax is running in your own leadership, I do offer private strategy calls, one-on-one focused conversations. We identify exactly where you are spending leadership capital you should be keeping. The link is in the description. I'll see you next week.